Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name's Dr. James Gill and you've joined me for not a clinical skills video. It's Christmas and it's time for our annual Christmas story for my nephew. Hello Harrison, hope you're doing okay. Last week I put out a question on the community tab asking people which Christmas story we should have this year. And one of the community here, Alice Barker, came forth to say that she would actually like to write a story for us. And if I'm honest, I thought, okay, sure, we'll give it a go. Not read any of her work. We'll see. Honestly, I've been blown away by it, and I'm sure you guys will too. So, with that in mind, let's begin. A Christmas Consultation by Alice Barker. 'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the towns, A&E was whirring with no sign of slowing down. Look, I know it's not quite a normal opening, but this isn't a normal story. And anyway, the person who wrote about not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse, had clearly never visited a modern-day accident and emergencies department on Christmas Eve. There is very little Christmas cheer to be found. In fact, if you looked around the waiting room on that particular night, you'd have seen a man holding a cloth around what may or may not have been all that remained of his left thumb. Several drunken louts shouting, and a sweet old lady named Doris, who, despite being left on the side of the ward for 6 hours in the hope she might eventually be allocated a bed, she still had a smile that outshone all the fairy lights on all the Christmas trees in the city. And in the middle of all this chaos was a certain Dr. Scrooge. I must stress before we meet him that Dr. Scrooge was by no means a bad man. In fact, back in his youth he'd been filled with enthusiasm, desperate to heal, diagnose and save lives. But too many years as an understaffed, underpaid and overworked doctor had taken its toll, and now he was grouchy, tired and miserable. His mood was so low, in fact, that he had no idea how it might rise again, and so, in the interest of all things being equal, he brought others down low with him. He snapped, scoffed and sneered, and whenever something really incensed him, he would mutter it was a load of humbug, sometimes so loudly that anyone who might have been about to approach him gave him a wide berth. I know you must be thinking that I need my head examined to say that Dr. Scrooge isn't a bad man, but appearances can be deceptive. Just wait and see. That Christmas Eve, Dr. Scrooge had just finished with a patient and was going over the notes he'd written, trying desperately to ignore the tacky tinsel decorations and male nurse who was tidying up things nearby and humming jingle bells far too cheerily for his liking. The department was heaving already, and just when he'd thought it couldn't get any fuller, a young boy burst through the door, surrounded by his shrieking, caterwauling parents and sporting, somewhat inexplicably, a small plastic Santa Claus shoved up his left nostril. Scrooge groaned audibly. Were people always so stupid around this time of year? Gonna be a busy night, sir. The male nurse's exuberant voice cut annoyingly through Scrooge's musings. What? I said it's going to be a busy one tonight. Always is, mind. Well, best get to work, Cratchit, Scrooge instructed, after examining the man's name tag. But Cratchit simply shook his head. Nah, not me, sir. I'm off home in an hour. Did my fair share of working last year Christmas. Not long now, and I'll be home with my missus and the kids. He beamed at the grumpy doctor. Now, smiles such as Cratchit's are like sunlight. They reach the depth of the coldest hearts and melt the ice around them, and everybody is made well again. But some hearts go beyond being cold. Some are sour, like spoiled milk. And when the sunlight hits those hearts, it doesn't melt them. It curdles them and turns them rancid, like butter. Guess which kind of heart Dr. Scrooge had. But you're needed here. Look at this place. It'll be all hands on deck, he scowled angrily. Cratchit's smile faded. With all due respect, sir, I am needed at home too. Nonsense, man. This is the NHS, the very lifeblood of this country. And these people need us to help them. Us to help them get better, that is, not by unwrapping presents or playing silly games. Look at how the department is struggling. And are you talking about going home? How selfish. But... No buts, Nurse Cratchit. I don't care what HR says. You're here to stay tonight. Is that clear? Yes, sir, Cratchit mumbled. Good. Dr. Scrooge grunted and stormed out. Gosh, the young things that made it through medical school these days just didn't have it in them. Keeping shifts, going home on time? Bah, what a load of humbug. As far as Scrooge was concerned, people needed to put their backs into it, and their arms and legs too, come to that. Whether it was Christmas or not, rotors be damned. He entered the staff room and set about making himself a cup of coffee, closing the door behind him and gazing out of the window at the snowfall outside. He'd been working all day. No one would miss him if he took 20 minutes rest. And no, he didn't care how much of a hypocrite that made him. He settled down on the sofa with his beverage and began to read a newspaper that someone had carelessly discarded. After a few minutes, he felt someone enter the room and, annoyed at having his break disturbed, looked up and flinched. There was a man in the doorway, but that couldn't be right, because the man had a face of someone who Scrooge knew to be dead, and yet there he was, plain as day, albeit floating a few inches off the ground and gleaming with a translucent supernatural luminosity. The spirit, for what else could he be, was one-time consultant Jacob Marley, and he took in Scrooge's shocked face and let out a laugh. "Oh, you look like you've seen a ghost, my old friend." Scrooge blinked. His brain could not, indeed would not, make sense of what he was seeing. He closed his eyes, and more forcefully this time, when he reopened them, the apparition had gone, albeit leaving a trail of faint laughter behind. It was the hours he'd put in today, Scrooge conceded. Nothing more. He was exhausted, and seeing things as a result. Actually, this sofa he was lying on was incredibly comfortable. He nestled down on the cushions and soon fell fast asleep. When Dr. Scrooge awoke, the room was in darkness. In fact, it seemed the whole hospital was pitch black. A power cut on Christmas Eve? This was the last thing they needed. Then, from somewhere far away, came a sound that sent icicles up Scrooge's spine. Echoing, deep laughter. Tentatively he turned and came face to face with the chortling apparition of Jacob Marley once again. "You're not still afraid of me, are you?" the ghost exclaimed. "Go away! Get away from me!" Scrooge was beside himself with terror. Marley tutted disapprovingly and straightened his spectral tie. His suit was as sharp as it had been in life. "Oh, my dear Ebenezer, what has happened to you? You were my brightest, boldest student, and now look at you. You're a shell of the man you once were." "I've done a great many things," Scrooge declared. "Aye, that I've no doubt. But have you forgotten what it truly means to be a doctor? What must truly lie at the heart of those who can answer the call of the medical profession? And so, as I taught you before, I must teach you again. There's a choice laid before you tonight, Ebenezer. You should be visited by 3 ghosts, all of the things of importance to show you. These things will influence the ultimate decision you must take, a matter of heart. Make the right choice, my old pupil, and your soul will be saved." And with that, Marley vanished, leaving Scrooge dazed and confounded. As the doctor collected his wits, he became so enraged that Marley had made him feel so unnerved. "Come back, Jacob, you fool. I don't have to do anything you say, you spineless weasel." Now, is that any way to speak to a gentleman who's spent his life in the service of others? Scrooge turned around again, only this time he saw not Marley, but a tall, rather jolly-looking gentleman with a thick beard, twinkling eyes, a black top hat, a long formal coat. In his hand he carried a faded leather Gladstone bag, and the tone that exuded from him was one of warmth and sepia as opposed to Marley's eerie white. "Who are you?" Scrooge stammered. "I am the ghost of doctors past," the new apparition explained, doffing his hat. "And you, if I'm not mistaken, are one Ebenezer Scrooge, Ph.D. This has to be a joke. Scrooge was so bewildered he could barely construct a sentence. "Oh, on my contrary, dear boy, what is to occur this night is of the utmost importance." He drew a fob watch on a brass chain from his breast pocket, examined it, and made a little noise of surprise. "Alas, we've already wasted too much time. Come." The rather rotund ghost then turned, cast his hand, and a glittering golden portal, the colour of angels' halos, opened up in the middle of the staff room. Through it, Dr. Scrooge could see a cold, wintry street, bustling with hazy images of people. And horses? Scrooge looked to the ghost, but no further explanation was forthcoming. So thinking quite certainly he must be losing his mind, he stepped through, and fell hard onto blackened, snow-covered cobbles. As he did, the wheels of a cart clattered past him, nearly running him over. Dr. Scrooge looked round in amazement, drinking in the gas lamps, and the men in top hats and tails, and women in dark-coloured skirts and bonnets. Filthy children chased stray dogs, and shouts from the merchants could be heard from every corner, intermingling with the fastly falling snow. "Where are we?" asked Scrooge. He shivered, dressed only in his scrubs. It was freezing. "London, 1890. Christmas Eve, to be exact. The ghost helped him up. "There's a man we need to meet. Oh, there he is." Scrooge followed the ghost's gaze to a man that looked very much like the ghost himself, but slimmer and with a frown on his handsome face. "This way," the ghost instructed. "It's all right. No one can hear or see you when you're with me." Scrooge did as he was bid, and together he and the ghost followed the man until he arrived at a respectable townhouse made of white limestone. When he walked up the path and knocked on the door, the other men followed him. His call was answered almost immediately by a smartly dressed maid, but her hair was matted and a mess. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Dr. Jenkins, thank goodness you're here," she cried. "Henry is struggling beyond measure, and we fear he will soon be with God. Master and mistress are with him now." "Take me to him, Eliza." The maid turned and led Dr. Jenkins up the winding staircase. Scrooge and the ghost of doctors past walked unnoticed at his heels, past the Christmas tree festooned with candles that stood pride of place in the parlour. As they reached the upper floor, the sound of lamenting came into earshot, the kind of deep, distressing keening that you hope to go your whole life without ever hearing. It was coming from a door that was slightly ajar at the top of the landing, and Scrooge could have sworn he saw Dr. Jenkins take a deep, steadying breath before he pushed it further open and entered. Scrooge went to follow, but the ghost held him back, mentioning he should simply watch from the doorway. Immediately the parents were on Dr. Jenkins. It was the lady of the house who spoke up first, makeup running like watercolours down her grief-stained face, and a fur wrap askew on her shoulders. "Sir, I beg of you, save him now! Vouchsafe his soul this night, or if it cannot be done, take mine instead, for I give it gladly." "Madame, you must calm yourself," Dr. Jenkins told her in his kindest voice. "I will do all that I can, but these matters often rely on God's will." "No god would be so cruel," bellowed the master, beside himself at losing his son and heir. "Do whatever you must to keep my boy in the land of the living." Dr. Jenkins sighed wearily as he pulled his stethoscope from the Gladstone, shifted around the bed, and that was then Scrooge saw the grey shade of a little boy lying unresponsive against his sheets, his hair dark and damp plastered against his forehead. Tentatively, Jenkins listened to the boy's heartbeat. Then he spoke. His voice was steeped with emotion. "He's slowing, I'm afraid. It will not be long now." At that, the mother started a fresh wave of screaming, and the father refused to bear it, demanding the doctor do all sorts of things which Scrooge knew would be ultimately useless. You only had to glance at the child to know he was dying. Scrooge and the ghost continued to watch as the priest was sent for and a vigil kept. When eventually the doctor listened for signs of life and found none, the parents wept afresh. He took his leave, his head bowed, before running down the stairs and out into the snowy night. Once outside, he kept running. Scrooge and the spirit followed him, eventually finding him at the entryway of a deserted alley. He bent double with grief and sobbing. "He's a grown man, and a doctor at that," scoffed Scrooge. "The boy's death was peaceful, and he'd obviously been ill a long time. Why should he be so upset?" "What if I told you he weeps not only for the boy, but for the parents too, who have to live their life with that loss? He's only human, Ebenezer. Yes, doctors are still human, something everybody seems to forget. And not only doctors, by God, but nurses, porters and cleaning staff. Everybody. Everyone is a small cog that comes together to make the great machine work, and every one of those cogs is human, vulnerable to sorrow, exhaustion and despair." Scrooge thought back to Cratchit, and the thought made him uneasy. After a moment, the ghost mused out loud. "You still haven't asked me the most important question." "And what's that?" "What was ailing that young man?" "It was tuberculosis. Quite common in these times, but not so much in yours." He nodded toward Dr. Jenkins. His despair, and the despair of many others, drove the finding and creation of a cure. The doctors past endured much for the benefit of their successors, and bore the sadness so you didn't have to. Honour their struggle in your work. Remember them." He waved his hand, and the golden portal reappeared. Scrooge stepped through, and he was back in the staff room again, albeit alone. The ghost's last words, "Remember them," reverberated around him. Scrooge would remember them, he realised, from now on. He had nothing but respect for those who'd gone before, for those who bravely pioneered the way for him to become what he was now. "Ah, but what about those who come after you?" The voice was silvery and soft, like how Scrooge imagined that a snake might talk. And there, in front of his very eyes, formed the shape of a pale woman dressed in surgeon's attire. She wore a blue paper mask on the lower half of her face, and a matching scrub cap covered her lank, unwashed hair. Despite these accessories, however, Scrooge could still see the purple bruises under her fatigued, haunted eyes. "I am the ghost of doctors yet to come," she told Scrooge, her tone serious, her gaze like a hawk. "And I have waited a long time for this day." She waved her hand, and a portal the colour of morning ice opened in the air. Understanding what was to be done, Scrooge stepped through and found himself in a clean, white ward. Upon seeing it, his heart leapt. This is how hospitals should be run. There was space and natural light aplenty. Medical staff stood close by, whilst gleaming, hovering drones tended to patients, scanning them electronically. Their beeps and whistles were only a noise in the quiet, restful ward, which had the same blissful ambience as the silence that occurred after a snowfall. The ghost of doctors yet to come touched him on his arm. "Not here." She led him out of the ward, down the corridors, each so tranquil and hygienic that Scrooge could not help but gaze around in awe. The ghost led him outside, past a hologram of a Christmas tree in the reception area, and Scrooge began to wonder where they were going. Electric vehicles drove serenely around the hospital's car park, but the ghost pressed on, stalking through the ornamental gardens that surrounded the place as if she couldn't wait to be out of there. Turning around, she addressed him in a brusque, no-nonsense manner. "Welcome to Christmas 2101. You were revered for your exemplary record at the hospital, Ebenezer Scrooge. Gone down in the annals of the hospital's history. Made it what it was." That sounded like something to be proud of. Why should you be so angry? When the hospital gardens eventually ended, there were some densely overgrown bushes, and the ghost pushed through them. Scrooge winced as the nettles tore at his bare arms. Eventually, they came to a disused industrial door, and the ghost shoved it open with a rusty creak. Then, nimble as a soft-pawed cat, she descended the steps on the other side. Old steps, splattered with rain and grime. It took them underground. Under the hospital, Scrooge realised. There, in the dark, dank tunnels that lay beneath that medical utopia, was another facility of a different kind altogether. Makeshift, badly lit, and barely sanitized. People coughed and spluttered and moaned as they lined the walls of the tunnel, which had been converted into a rudimentary ward. Staffed, dressed not too dissimilar to the ghost of doctors yet to come, hastily made their way around the patients, some of which were lying on dirty mattresses. Above them, pipes dripped stagnant water. Those who were able waylaid the staff and begged them for help and supplies. But Scrooge noticed they could only spare the bare minimum of what was obviously the very little time they had, and the tiniest amounts of mixtures from bottles and the smallest bandages, with the larger ones torn in half to make them last longer. It was looking like triage in a war zone. "I don't understand," Scrooge told the ghost. "This is the hospital right above them. Surely they'd get better care there." The ghost shrugged. "They could, until they decided to privatise it all." Scrooge's stomach plummeted like a heavy rock. "What? If you want good medical attention, it costs thousands now. These people, they can't afford what's up there, so they have to come down here." Scrooge was stunned into silence. "I have a question of my own now," the ghost continued. "When the privatisation bill was being debated, why didn't you speak out? You had standing. You could have stopped it. You had your doubts. I know you did, but you never voiced them." The desperation in her voice required an honest answer. But how could he ever justify a decision he hadn't even made yet? To find a response to that, Scrooge looked inside himself. I liked the idea at first, what they planned. I liked the fact they said it could cut down on waiting times, backlogs, you know. Only it didn't. By the time I realised what was actually going on, I guess it was too late." The ghost looked at him with something like disgust and betrayal. "It's never too late. You're even more of a disappointment than I thought you'd be. Come, time to go." She waved her hand and the portal opened. "No, wait. It doesn't have to be like this. This is yet to come, right? So when the time comes, I'll speak out. Like you said." "Will you? Will you really? From what I've read, you did quite well under privatisation. You enjoyed power, having minions beneath you." Scrooge's thoughts once again turned uncomfortably to Cratchit. No, that's not who I am, I swear." "You can't," she suddenly shrieked. "People like you are incapable of change, Ebenezer Scrooge. You are the worst of the worst. You are a hypocrite, a coward, and a fraud. You are not worthy to be a doctor. You have no heart. You have no—" Her scream was cut off as the portal closed shut behind Scrooge, who was safely back in the darkened staff room. It tried to catch his breath, terrified and shaking. Was it true? Was it really true? Was he, the doctor who worked all hours and did his best to be the best, really just a callous bully? Overwhelmed, he began to cry. Oh, don't cry. I hate it when people cry. It makes me all splotchy. Plus, it's sad. Please don't cry. The voice was high-pitched and innocent-sounding, like a child ready to burst into fits of giggles. Leave me alone, ghost, Scrooge said, his voice still wobbling from weeping. I can't take any more tonight. Not even little old me, said the ghost, and it dropped down from its hiding place in the ceiling. Whatever Scrooge had been expecting, it certainly wasn't this. Whereas the other 3 ghosts had taken human forms, this one was anything but, because it was a literal sheet. It looked as if someone had drawn it on a notepad in boredom. It had simple black dots for eyes, a curved, smiling mouth, and a smooth, white cloth that, whilst domed at the top where the head would have been, made it impossible to tell if it was male or female. It was also very small, and despite everything, Scrooge found himself thinking it was rather cute. So what are you the ghost of? He asked. Brace yourself, I'm very important. Are you ready? I'm the ghost of bits of paper. The ghost punctuated this declaration with a flourish and swooped joyfully up to the ceiling, only to find Scrooge looking utterly unimpressed as it came back down. That's not a thing. Excuse me, it is most definitely a thing. Do you know how many bits of paper people actually use? Doctors especially. There's prescriptions, sick notes, appointment reminders, not to mention all those used in thyroid examinations. Yes, I am very important. You should consider yourself very lucky I decided to help you. But the way this was going, I thought I was going to meet the ghost of Doctor's Present next. There's no such thing, and if it was, I think you'd find I could fulfil that role. Look at the state of you. The little sprite doubled over, laughing, if sprites could do such a thing. And then it grew serious. Now, come on. It's Christmas Eve, and I'm missing out on the last-minute wrapping frenzies to be here. Ignoring the ghost's jibe, Scrooge stood back as his new companion flew in a loop-de-loop, as he didn't have arms, and yet another portal appeared, this time rimmed with burnished bronze, the colour of mulled wine. Scrooge stepped through, and somewhere into what looked very much like right now. In fact, this very night. Snow was falling lazily, aimless lines, refusing to stick as it landed on the too wet ground. From one of the bay windows in a nearby terrace, a Christmas tree shone brightly, and a dog barked somewhere unseen. In comparison to all the other places Scrooge had been tonight, it was really quite unremarkable. This way, old man. We're going to see a friend of mine. The ghost of bits of paper zoomed on ahead. Hey, less of the old. I've never heard of ghosts having living friends. Before tonight, you never heard of ghosts existing at all. And yes, I do have living friends. I like this one a lot. He's nice. He's got a Bengal cat, calls it Dakar, and it can see us, even if he can't, so be careful. At long last, they came to a cosy little house, where decorations gleamed and lights glowed. The ghost made a shushing noise and led Scrooge around to a window. There, very close by, was a man, wearing, of all things, a Jurassic Park Christmas jumper, sat at a desk with his back to them and a laptop open in front. Dr. Scrooge could see the screen very clearly from his vantage point. The man was fiddling around with some video software, resting a hand on top of his curly brown hair. I don't understand, said Scrooge. Shh, whispered the ghost. Look. As Scrooge watched, the man minimised the software and revealed a playlist uploaded to a YouTube channel. As this man scrolled down, it was clear that the podcast had many, many videos. They were all similar, footage of a man doing something Scrooge recognised all too well, clinical examinations. Some were cranial, some were visual, but some were anatomical and informative. Scrooge could see that each one had thousands of views. He's a doctor just like you. Many years ago, he tried to do some films to help his students to demonstrate how things should be done. When he put them on the internet, though, something unexpected happened. Normal people watched them. They seemed to like them. Something about the way he did it made them reassured, and some were tingly and sleepy for some reason. So he did it more and more, and his fans came to respect the knowledge that the doctors used to help their patients. All it took was a few cameras and bits of paper, the ghost puffed up proudly. Well, it wasn't just him. There's others too. They all do it together and spread information far and wide so that people understand. They know that doctors care. But there's something I don't understand, confessed Scrooge. When I saw Marley earlier tonight, he said of all the things I would see would influence a decision I have to make, a matter of heart. He's not involved in that. I haven't had to make any decisions. What? You've seen doctors in the past be so sad they made a vaccine. You've seen doctors yet to come give help to people who can't afford it. And I've just told you doctors today spread joy, and you still don't understand. I can see I'm going to have to spell it out for you. The matter of the heart, Dr. Ebenezer Scrooge, is your heart, because without it, nobody can be a doctor, or any medical person come to that. Being a doctor isn't about numbers and paperwork and boxes ticked. It's about having heart, which you have forgotten. So since I made it so glaringly obvious, the decision is this. Dr. Ebenezer Scrooge, are you truly a doctor, or are you not one at all? Scrooge didn't answer right away. Instead, he swallowed hard and looked back at the window. The man had moved, and he was now stood, hugging his wife to his chest, whilst cradling a tiny baby in his arms. Ebenezer gazed upon the family and remembered. He remembered being a student, and the favourite of Jacob Marley. He remembered the sobbing doctor in 1890. He remembered the ghost of doctors yet to come, calling him a coward. But most of all, he stood looking at the image of Yuletide bliss in front of him. He remembered Nurse Cratchit, desperate to get home. Very suddenly, he found he was desperate to get home too. Take me back, now. I am a doctor. I do have heart. Oh, please, ghost, take me back now. Let me put things right. The ghost smiled, did a loop-de-loop, and the portal appeared. Dr. Scrooge blinked, gasping as he woke. His head hurt. He felt cold, and the lights were blinding him. The lights were blinding him. Slowly, he walked to the staff room door and peeked out. It was the hospital, his hospital, with its lights and tacky tinsel decorations, severed thumbs, drunken louts, and Doris's smile. And it was still Christmas Eve. There was still time to put things right. He strode purposely towards the A&E department. As he did so, he passed a picture of Jacob Marley, gazing sagely down at him from the wall. Thank you, old friend. I've learnt my lesson. It might have just been Scrooge's imagination, but he could have sworn that Marley in the photo winked. When he burst through the department doors with all the jolliness of Father Christmas, everybody looked up, unsure whether to act horrified or surprised at the change that seemingly overcome the notorious miser. Scrooge ignored them. He was a different man now. Let them see what had become. Nurse Cratchit, he called. The man came shuffling out nervously, looking quite quiet and subdued. Sorry, sir. Do you need me? I was just sorting... Never mind now, Scrooge told him kindly. Go home. Cratchit gasped. But you said... I know what I said. I've had a change of heart. Go home. Be with your family. He then turned back to the department at large. Is anyone else working that shouldn't be? Over the next few minutes, Scrooge sorted out who was meant to be there and who wasn't, and those who weren't gave him their utmost gratitude and thanks as he sent them away for the season, calling out goodbyes and promises to see him in the new year. It made Scrooge grateful in turn. These medical staff were the cogs. They might be slightly smaller than him, but they were just as powerful, maybe even more so, and sometimes they needed a break too. When they'd gone, he smiled at his remaining staff, who'd been happy to work their shifts. Right, everyone, it's a busy night, but if you do your best, that's all I can ask of you. Remember, we must honour those who came before us, give care to those who need it, and share knowledge. If you get burnt out there, there's mince pies in the staff room. Oh, and now I think of it, has anyone got a minute to show me how YouTube works? Well, I thought that was fantastic. And thank you so much to Alice for penning that for us. I can only, literally say that again. Thanks to Alice for that. I'd thoroughly recommend checking out some of her other stories. I'm definitely going to do that now. I hope you all have a very Merry Christmas. Stay safe, look after yourselves, and we'll see you in another video in the new year, perhaps. Take care. We'll see you soon. Cheerio.